partnership. There are opportunities for people to for someone from my team or myself to come spend some time.
All set? Shall we get into it?
We'll talk later.
Okay, everyone, welcome. Really nice to be here with you all on this afternoon and right before we kick off to another exciting week with the UN General Assembly getting well underway. My name is Michelle Maleki. I am not a teacher or educator, so I'm here to be the moderator for this panel today. I actually work at the technology company HP, and I sit on our sustainability and social innovation team. So much of the work I do focuses on how we leverage tech for good, and particularly within the education space, and making sure it's a way that we not only support students, but we support teachers, of course, as well. And so I'm really glad to be here moderating this panel with the true experts on this topic, and to hear kind of their different regional ways that they're working, what their organizations are doing, and how they're essentially empowering teachers and educators, particularly in a time when, we see more and more a lack of either support or different challenges that are being faced in different regions. Here in the United States, it was just recently, I think, the cover of a Time magazine piece, right, and the issues that teachers here face in this own country. So with that, I just want to set the stage a little bit by referring to a very famous teacher, and one that people who attended the Solve at MIT conference earlier this year know all that well, which is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And he once said, "I am a teacher. It's how I define myself. A good teacher isn't someone who gives the answers out to their kids, but is understanding of needs and challenges and gives tools to help other people succeed. That's the way I see myself." And so I'd like you all to just kind of introduce yourselves, and if you don't mind, talk about how do you see yourselves as teachers in your current role from your past lives, and really just provide that as kind of your opening introduction. And we'll start with you, please.
Sure. So, hi, I'm Joe Negrone. It says what I am there. I'm the founding principal of KIPP Infinity Middle School. I graduated from Harvard in 2001, joined Teach for America, not Armenia, in 2001, and taught there for 3 years. Wanted to find a place where I felt like I could basically take the kids that I was teaching in my classroom and be sure that I was sending them off to the next grade to someone who was holding the same sort of high academic and behavioral expectations. It's very frustrating as a teacher when you work really hard and then your kids come back to you a year or two later and say, "I'm not learning anything." So I applied to actually teach at KIPP, and they said, "Well, why don't you start your own school?" So in 2005, I applied for a Fisher Fellowship and was able to start KIPP Infinity Middle School, and have been with KIPP since then. The coolest thing is that the school I started, which started in 5th grade, those 10-year-olds, now some of them teach at KIPP Infinity. So it's like this crazy feeling old type thing. And as far as like the teacher piece, like the quote I sort of live by is this James Baldwin quote that goes, "Children never are very good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them." And so what I've really tried to do more than anything is model as a principal, model for teachers, model for kids, because to me that is the most important thing. We don't want to yell at a child to stop yelling, right? The hypocrisy in that is immediately apparent to them. So I've lived my life as a principal and as a teacher really through that quote.
You can still apply to Teach for Armenia, if anything changes for you. So hi, everyone. I'm Larissa Hovhannissian. I myself am also a Teach for America alumna from 2010. I did my core in 2010, I already said that, in Phoenix, Arizona. And during those 2 years, as I was teaching special ed, it just kind of started, this idea of launching something similar to Teach for America in Armenia, which is my second homeland, kind of started forming, and one thing led to the other. And I found myself moving back to Armenia in 2013 and launching Teach for Armenia. I was a pretty good teacher, but I knew it wasn't my greatest strength, but I knew I wanted to, spend my career in education. And so I think now in the capacity of the CEO of Teach for Armenia, I'm trying to model leadership, and I'm trying to, instill within the Armenian youth and the people that I work with, and alongside of just this real passion for change and real passion for education, and that education is a real tool to not only impact kids today and really give them a great education, but also, nation build and change the trajectory of our country. So I feel like I'm still a teacher outside of the classroom, a little bit of a different capacity, but still an educator at heart. And I'm very happy to be here with you today. Thank you.
Hi. Well, my name is José Escamilla, and I go by Pepe, which is Joe in Spanish, by the way. So we are tocayos, we'll say in Spanish now. So my background in my former life, I studied artificial intelligence, and then I started to do artificial intelligence in education, and I moved to the School of Education. So there I learned by practice a lot of things in education. So during the last maybe 20 years, I've been working in education and innovation because of the use of computers, and also because I understand some stuff about education. I work right now in a unit in Tec de Monterrey. Tec de Monterrey is a private non-for-profit university in Mexico, one of the most well-known universities in Latin America, or the Spanish-speaking world. And I work in a unit there that is in charge of the future of education, the future of higher education in particular. So our objective is to find out how higher education will be in 2030. We believe that higher education is going to change a lot, and I can tell you we are constructing something right now for 2019 that's very innovative in my opinion, and bold in terms of innovation. Starting with a phrase also, it's a good idea. There's a phrase by John Dewey. I don't know if I will say it well in English because I know it in Spanish, but you can correct me because you know how Spanish people make mistakes. It's something like that. If we teach our children as we did yesterday, we rob them of tomorrow, or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense in English. And it was in 1926, I think, that he wrote that. So, and it's never more true now than what it was in that time of the year. What is a model of a teacher? We have or something that I would like to be. I don't want to say that I am that, but we have a concept in a university and a prize that we deliver, and it's called Inspiring Teacher or Inspiring Faculty. And we believe that you're an inspiring faculty when you change the life of your students somehow, because either they remind you as a person, as a real person with emotions that touches them, their souls, not only their minds, but also some faculty because they learn by that faculty. Their students learn to love the subject or the discipline or whatever. No, they become really in love with that thing. And there's many different ways of becoming inspiring. So I expect that someday I will be an inspiring teacher.
That's great. Thank you. So, I mean, obviously you're all bringing some sort of personal experience as to what got you into the role that you do. How did you kind of connect with it? One of the things that I think is really fascinating too is hearing about some of the different challenges, right? We're here this week to focus on solutions. We're thinking about what are the different things we all can do. We hopefully leave this week feeling, inspired and able to go and learn from others and do something. So in that spirit, I will refer again just quickly to the Time Magazine article that said in the US, for example, there's a huge pay issue with teachers, right? They're getting more education than ever, higher degrees, all of this is happening, but yet for some reason, in terms of that education perspective, they're not getting rewarded. And so I love that magazine really called that out, and I think it's one issue of a number of them. And this is something I really, truly want to discuss, coming from a family of public education teachers right here in Staten Island, New York, and hearing and seeing what they all had to do, using their own money to buy resources for classrooms, staying after to make sure that students are getting the support they need, when there are other situations. And so I'd love to just kind of hear of a challenge that you've all either dealt with personally or in your experience in your role, and maybe share kind of what are some of the things you've either thought or leave it as a question as well for us to kind of have a dialogue at the end of this session.
Sure, I think teacher sustainability is a huge thing. So at KIPP, we're a network of charter schools, and as such, we have some freedom and flexibility in terms of how we structure our day. So when I started KIPP Infinity, kids were in school from 7:25 to 5, and they came to school every other Saturday for 4 hours. And that is a substantially, and in addition to having 4 weeks of summer school as well. So it is a substantially longer time commitment. So the teacher sustainability issues of a traditional public school are like 20-fold at a school like the school I started, and yet I was able to retain teachers over a significant period of time. I think a couple of the ways in which I was able to do that, one was we realized you really have to invest heavily in helping teachers over the first year hump. If they feel good about the materials they produced over the first year, you're substantially more likely to keep them in the classroom. And then two, for me, I remember starting a professional development meeting with my staff, and somebody came in and just started crying and said, "I can't handle this shit anymore." And I was like, wow, it's really that bad. And I started talking with folks, and what we realized was that we could be more efficient with our time. And what we ended up doing, we were the first KIPP school to go from 7:25 to 8 to 4. And I know that doesn't seem like a substantial amount of time, but when you actually listen to and respond to the needs of your employees, of the most important people in a school building, which are the teachers, when you listen to and respond to them and really do something that makes their voice heard, that makes things more sustainable. So again, for me, those two things, specifically with teachers, is really investing heavy in year one, because it's such a hard job, and then just being able and willing to listen and make sure their voices are heard.
That's great. And Larissa, I imagine you were able to use so much of what you gained through teacher training, I imagine, as Teach for America. But Teach for Armenia will certainly come with a new suite of challenges and things. If you could also answer that question from your perspective, please.
Sure. I mean, I think it's important to kind of give our audience like a quick overview of just the state of education in Armenia today. It's the profession is incredibly unattractive. It has probably the lowest pay, substantially below average pay for any public sector. Our pedagogical university, our school of education, is the easiest university to get into. So basically, the way it works in Armenia is you have to pass all these university entrance exams, and if you make like a certain amount, then you can go to the better university, and then if you make less and less, there's all these options that kind of correlate to the number of points you get, and the lowest point gets you into the pedagogical university, which is quite sad and obviously speaks a lot about our government's priorities in terms of education also. Armenia is a post-Soviet state, and up until very recently has just been living in this oligarchic kind of, incredibly corrupt political regime. And that's obviously trickled down to all of our public sector kind of industries, but especially to the field of education, because a lot of the voting and a lot of the political power is kind of maneuvered through schools. And so principals are actually, especially when we work with them, like we have a team that works with our public sector, and principals actually fall under our government kind of external stakeholders that we work with. And so going off of that, there's very limited accountability. It's incredibly under-resourced, and we actually work with schools that have significant budget challenges, because Armenia also is a country that currently faces mass exodus. People are just constantly leaving. And obviously people leave from the rural areas mostly. They go to Russia or the Ukraine to do labor jobs. And because our schools receive budgets per student enrollment, you can imagine how hard it's just been for principals to upkeep the school. You have a school that was meant for 500 kids, now it has 50 kids, all of the fixed costs are the same, so just economically it's becoming very difficult to manage. In terms of, I agree with everything you said and what our training program does. So when our fellows get recruited, they go through an intensive pre-training institute called Summer Institute, which is very similar to Teach for America. And then if they successfully pass that, they go into their 2-year teaching commitment at a partner school. And again, all of our placements are rural because that's where the biggest need is. And we have very intensive kind of, not just training, but support. All of our fellows have coaches. These are very, very professional, experienced teachers from the public education system that not only give pedagogical support or classroom management support, but also a lot of psychological support and just really help new teachers live through the first 6 months and then the first year and kind of transition them into independence. Basically, any new job is hard, and especially when you're a young person walking into a classroom, managing kids from point A to the point that you want to take them to. It is like a management job, and so obviously it comes with its challenges, and having ongoing support and being part of a network and knowing that there are other people that are getting up at 5:30 in the morning every day and fighting the same fight that you are has just been very empowering, not just for the people who are in our program, but also just other teachers who are in our schools. And I think that's what we've come to realize is that our government does provide trainings to teachers, but they're super obviously boring and they're out of touch with reality. And so what our organization has now begun to do is use our fellows as an opportunity to do real-time training for other teachers and hopefully help them just get a little bit more joy out of the work that they're doing. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of work to do.
That's great. No, thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like there's quite a number of similarities in terms of that first time when someone is a teacher needing that really big support, right? Otherwise, that's when you're most at risk of perhaps losing that person in the system. And so you obviously are working with in the higher education space and dealing with issues as related to teaching and lifelong learning as well. So can you maybe explain from your perspective and in Mexico how you've kind of responded to some of the challenges that might face teachers, be they higher education or beyond?
Just I want to, before answering your question or trying to answer your question, when I was listening to Larissa, I said, oh, well, that's very similar to what I can say about Mexico, except that we are not a former Soviet country, but very similar.
But it's incredible.
Very similar situation.
It's so similar across the world, and being part of this big Teach for All network that Teach for America is also part of, you realize that it's super similar. And I've traveled to Mexico and I've seen the way schools operate there, and it's unbelievable how similar problems are and solutions are.
And I want to touch just one thing that maybe is related to what you were saying also, and maybe that it wasn't addressed directly by the panel. It's something about the how you say, the profession of being teacher, being a teacher. When I was young, a long time ago, being a teacher was prestigious. So it was prestigious to be a teacher. So people, for instance, my parents come from a small town near Monterrey. The big city is Monterrey. And in that town, if you were a teacher, you were someone that was proud because you were a teacher, and people say, oh, the teacher, he knows things. He arrived there because she arrived there because some extra miles that that person had to do. And now we are in a moment that, as you said, more or less, well, being teacher for some people is like, I couldn't be another thing now when I'm a teacher. You know? So how we became from something that was very prestigious maybe 40, 30 years ago to what we are now. And sometimes I want to be positive. I'm an optimist. So that now we talk about education on the newspaper, on the journals, on TV. Maybe it has been also bad because many of all the bad things go in the main media. But maybe it's also good because that it's putting the accent on the important things, and there's I expect that we could change that, no? So talking about what we are doing in higher education, if you give me some minutes, in 2019 we are going to change our educational model that we have been piloting for the last 4 years. So our students will be learning by challenges, real-world challenges. Those challenges are developed by our professors, by our faculty, in order to develop some competencies. And those challenges will be done with businesses, ONGs, governments, and they will have learning modules attached so that they will have the knowledge they need to solve the challenge. And the students will be assessed on the evidence that they have developed those competencies on the challenges. So why I like this model, because I think that is more, it motivates more our students, but also our faculty, because it connects our students and our faculty with the real world, and it challenges both of them to keep the peace of learning and engaging with the world, not just there in the school. And I can talk a little bit more later.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's so amazing the point you bring up of the fact that teaching is not considered a prestigious career anymore,
Except
right?
maybe in some countries like, Finland.
Right. It's really incredible when we think about all the conversation today, at least that I hear in my space, is, what are the jobs of the future and the skills of the future? And we go back to this most basic element, which is just teaching our children, teaching people for lifelong learning. And to think that that's not as sexy or encouraged as much as other topics out there, it's just is mind-blowing to me. So sorry for that side conversation, but it's a really great point you bring up. And I just want to ask kind of more personal questions, I think, of each of your organizations. And Larissa, I want to build off a point you made, which is around the fellowship that you create with Teach for Armenia. And can you share kind of how that works, and particularly how do you keep people interested then, particularly when they're getting placed maybe in rural settings, or what are some of the things that have really connected with the teachers that you're supporting?
Sure. So every year we open up applications for anyone who's interested. They have to have a bachelor's degree. They could come from any discipline, any profession. And we people apply. There's multiple phases they need to go through. The final stage is this huge assessment center that is super intense. I was interviewing one time for a consulting job, and I think that my Teach for America interview was harder. So we pretty much simulated that, and what we really look for is not just intelligence and good grades from your university and so on and so forth. We really look for the right fit of a person, and therefore about 8 to 10% of people overall get selected every year. These are people that are very aligned to not just like our vision and understand our mission, but also just internalized the values that we believe to be super critical for not just the organization, the movement, but also just for these fellows to be successful with kids. Going back to what you were touching on, like, so much of what I think about now is that education has changed so much, or should be changing at a faster pace, and it's not so much what you know as a teacher, in my opinion, but it's more about who you are as a teacher and whether or not you are able to facilitate knowledge and really help kids along the learning process. The way I think about this is as long as you're open and you want to learn, and I can work with that. But if your heart is not in the right place, or if you're not a very nice person, then maybe you shouldn't be working in the same space as kids. And so once people get selected, they go through this 2-year program. It's incredibly it's not just challenge, it's also physically challenging. So it's not just psychologically challenging, it's also physically challenging, because we only place in rural communities. And our communities are incredibly poverty stricken. I'm sure that you probably have similar, this is going to be similar to some of the countries that you guys are from, but no running water, no toilet in the house, sometimes no electricity. In Armenia's case, we border a few countries with which we're in a ceasefire war, basically, currently. There are gunshots that go through, and our fellows are actually placed on the border. So these are areas that no one wants to go teach in. We have a 50% teacher surplus in the country, yet a 40% shortage in our schools, meaning that people just would rather not be in education, would rather not use their degree, but not go to that school. And so we only prioritize schools like that. And when we recruit, when we first started, it was more like theoretical, and it's like, this is so exciting, and we're starting this movement, and we're going to change the country, and we're going to change the world. And shortly after our first recruitment season, we kind of then moved into, this is what your house is going to look like. You're not going to have water in your house. If you're not okay with this, it's not a reflection of you or that you're not, it just means that you're not the right person for this program, and this isn't the program for you. Mm-hmm. And so I'm incredibly honored and happy to say that since we've launched, this is our 4th year, we have not lost a single person.
Wow.
From our first to our 2nd year. We've graduated everyone who's kind of started their journey with us. And I think it's a real testament to the team that we have on the ground that's doing all of this. You asked
Amazing.
About values. No, there was a second part to your question.
It's how do you keep people kind of engaged? What are some of the things that really connect, right? Because obviously you're doing a great job of setting the level,
Yeah.
right, in terms of what the life is going
Yeah.
to be. It's not some, excursion or something that's just a fun stint in the road for you. This is a real thing, and you're helping, people who desperately need this teaching support. So how do you kind of keep that engagement and that excitement?
I think once you design the experience does it on its own. Like, these fellows walk into these communities, they fall in love with their kids, they fall in love with the people that they're working with, that they're serving. And I can say this from my own experience. I thought I was going to do this for 2 years, like a lot of us do when we joined Teach for America, but it's just not the case. Because your priorities change, you begin to understand that your everyday could make this world, even if it's just one person, it could make it a better place. And it just becomes so addictive. Mm-hmm. It's and I see this addiction in a good way, like, kind of come alive in our fellows. They walk into this committed, and then within the next 6 months,
That's
like,
great.
they're just different people. They're the better versions of themselves. And
Great.
so I think that's why we haven't lost anyone. And even now, we have 50 alums, and all of them are still in the education sector, not necessarily in the classroom, but also, I think, a great indicator of the fact that despite all the mistakes we're making, we're still going in the right direction.
That's great. Thank you. And you touched on a good point, which is, in a way, it's character, which I notice is a key part of what you're doing, Joe, at the KIPP Infinity Middle School in particular. And so you talk about how it's character, it's about well-being, both of your students, right, but also of your teachers. And so from your perspective, what does that ultimately mean? When you talk about the character, how do you help support that and build that and cultivate that while also bringing in, the amazing qualities people are bringing into the profession already?
Yeah, I think, so a couple things. One, we approach what we do with character from a very strengths-based mindset, right? This idea, and for those who don't know, every single one of our KIPP schools serves essentially all African American and Latino students, right? So you can come in and say, I'm going to teach you character, or you can come in and say, no, you are coming in with all this grit and this self-control, and we're going to use the things that you're good at and show you some other things. Or, oh, that thing you're doing, that's called social intelligence, right? It's just naming the things that they're already bringing to them and making sure that no content is important enough not to stop if, like, psychological safety is in jeopardy. So if I ask you what 12 times 10 is, and then you say 100, and then another child on the side of the room starts laughing, right? You stop the class. You don't just continue because you have this test that's going to happen tomorrow. And for me, the North Star, the thing I always think about is this classroom, is this school, is this place good enough for my own two sons? I have a 1 and a 4-year-old now, so they're not ready yet. But I feel like when I approach everything I do with the modeling James Baldwin quote I alluded to earlier, and the fact like, if this teacher was talking to my son this way, would I be happy about it? If my son was sitting in this classroom, would it be good enough? That is a consistent driving force to continuously improve. The other thing I would say, I don't know how many folks in here have actually spent a day as a kid in school. So one of the things we do is called being a Kipster for a day. So when I was a Kipster for a day, I met the child who I was shadowing at 5 o'clock in the morning at his house in the South Bronx. We commuted to school. We had the crappy school breakfast. And then I spent my entire day till 5 o'clock. They happened to earn detention, so I was after school with them for detention from 5 to 6 o'clock. And at the end of that day, you are exhausted. And it was that experience that was one of the major changes, was the school hours. It was because we experienced what it was like to be a kid from 7:25 to sometimes 6 o'clock. And then the other piece is, I was crazy and I went home and did all the homework with them at their house. Wow. And then you realize like what we're asking kids, what we were asking our kids to school is just not, what we were asking kids to do at our school was not fair or just, right? And the other piece is, do the same thing for being a teacher, right? So as a principal, I always taught at least 2 hours of math a day. When you live the life of the people you are managing, you have a much greater deal of empathy, and you actually get a lot more respect in return.
That's great. And kudos to you, I think, for creating that environment, right? To make sure that your teachers do feel like they don't have to just rush and do something because the test is coming up, or they have to get a student to perform a certain way for whatever standard they have to meet, and acknowledging that, which is great. And so I'd love to ask you, as part of what you're doing, I read that you're all about education innovation, and I think you mentioned some of your background and how you've used AI, and can you just maybe speak a little bit to how you measure some of the education innovation projects you do, and maybe just share with the room one or two that's very exciting for you and how we can learn from it.
Okay, we are known, I will say, as a university that is very innovative. And 2 years ago, we realized that we are not innovative because if you cannot show that you're adding value what you're doing to the public you serve, which is our students, then you're maybe just being creative or using some stuff. So we decided that we had to have a way of measuring what we are doing. So we created this framework that is called Escala E, which in Spanish, Escala is like a stair, but it's also a measuring scale or some rule or whatever. So it means that you measure something, but also you can climb some steps when you're measuring. And I, because I stands for innovation, so it has 5 criteria related to the learning outcomes, the originality of the innovation, the scalability, the financial viability, but also the fit of that innovation in the culture and the culture and the values of the institution, because maybe it's very good for you, but it's not, or Armenia, but it's not good for institution, no? So that is allowing us to measure what we're doing, and also have at the end a portfolio, because we do a lot of, we have funding for our faculty to do innovation, and that's allowing us to have some like a portfolio of things that we can use either for scaling it organically with our faculty or top-down scalability.
And what do you find, for example, when you talk about the Escala, what was some of the learnings or things you built into it, right? What are some things you look out for when you do measuring? What are some of the key, we would say, KPIs or drivers of that?
Of measuring learning outcomes?
Yes.
Well, one of the things that we found is that most of the time people measure only disciplinary skills. And so one of the things that are very important is non-disciplinary skills and also some other values in learning that is related to motivation, For instance, motivation is very important because the amount of effort that you think that you're putting in something that you're very passionate about, it doesn't feel like that weight, that task. For instance, when you were saying that children are doing some stuff at home, if it's boring, then the weight of that is huge. But maybe it's the same amount of work, but it's something that you're passionate about. So we also measure, we try to encourage faculty to measure also the engagement that the student has in activities. And not only disciplinary skills, but non-disciplinary skills. Those skills that we call sometimes soft skills, that in my opinion are so important for life that we should call them power skills, because they are the things that empower people then to be better persons and do more things.
Great. Can we actually just stay on the skills piece for one moment? Because I know that's such a big topic today is, what are the 21st century skills or skills needed for the future? And you keep hearing, particularly today, this concept of empathy, right? How do we teach empathy? How do we teach critical thinking? How do we teach negotiation? Have you been able to see that come out in some of your lesson plans? Or can you maybe share what are some of your thoughts, as this is a very, very, hot topic today, and I would love to get the perspectives of each of you, if you don't mind. Do you want to start?
Well, just because maybe I started that. And in relationship with that model, Tech 21, the name of our model is Tech 21 because we are Tech de Monterrey, Tecnológico Monterrey, and everything is called Tech in Tech de Monterrey, even the swimming pool, no? But the 21, that was a problem that we have. And the 21, in fact, started because we said, how can we make sure that our students are developing those 21st century skills?
Yep.
Okay. So we said we are not going to develop those skills in the classroom because the classroom is the situations in the classroom are so artificial sometimes that it's hard to develop those skills. So we have to take their students like outside of the classroom in a world that is complex, that is not departmentalized in silos where you have knowledge in different disciplines, that is more confusing because the problem is not really well defined as the real world. And that's the way we can really help our students to develop those skills.
Great.
So I would say that that's the relationship of skills with our new educational model.
Perfect. Joe, did you add?
So what's 12 times 12? Right, you ask kids that and they answer that question just as quickly, right? But then if you ask them what 12 times 13 is, then they have to do like write it down, and then the 6, and then like little 0 underneath that you don't understand why it's there. And so this idea of 12 times 13 is just 156 because you're adding another 12, right? Versus when you talk about being taught how you were taught, and I really think it takes we need to recognize that being a skilled teacher does take time, and the curriculum that we use and matters, and the assessments that we hold schools accountable for matter a lot too. And there's some innovative things going on with assessment in America that is pushing kids' thinking in the right direction. But until we move away, I want my son to be able to say 12 times 13 is 156 because I know 12 times 12 is 144 and I add a group of 12, not them doing this calculation on a piece of paper. And that takes time, and it takes investing in teachers to understand how to present materials in a way that fosters real conceptual understanding versus just getting to an answer so that you can perform well on an exam.
I think in Armenia's context, the biggest issue we face as a country, and I think a lot of countries are kind of running into the same issue, is that we don't really know what we want our kids to be doing 10 years down the line, for example. And I think that's going back to the topic that you brought up. I think it's obviously connected to technology and the job market, and in Armenia's context, the situation is so devastating there that I think you just see it sooner than you do maybe in more, in wealthier countries. And so I always ask I always ask our government, specifically the Ministry of Education, like what their vision is for education, and I really believe that it starts there. I think it starts with here's where our country is going to be. We think here is of our vision for what we think education needs to be, and then like here is where we are now, and here is what we need to be doing today in a classroom. And finally, I'm getting some traction with the new administration, but I think that it has to start as a national priority. But until our government decides to do that, we actually developed a student vision for the communities that we're working in. And I think the biggest issue that we faced up until this moment is that usually people just kind of sit down in front of their laptop and write this student vision statement. That's not how it's supposed to be done. The way it's supposed to be done is you need to get everyone to sit down and write the student vision statement together with their, with their parents, their students, their communities. And so I just want to really quickly read you like a draft. We're still going through the strategic clarity process. It's still going to take us a while to figure it all out, but this is what our community wrote together with us. When our students are 25 years old, their education will have enhanced their life circumstances and enabled them to provide for themselves and their families. They will have become advocates for high-quality education for all children in Armenia and beyond, because we have a huge diaspora. They will have become active citizens in their communities, embodying value and pride in the history and culture of their regions. By developing and enhancing the opportunities available to upcoming generations, our students will be the transformation needed to shape Armenia's future. Our students will be locally rooted, globally informed leaders, contributing to the systemic development of Armenia and her position in the changing global economy. This is something that we wrote together with 85 communities, all stakeholders. I think it touches on a lot of things, active citizenship, being really rooted to the land that you're from, but also understanding that you're part of a bigger global world. And so I think the biggest issue for us is, yes, empathy and all those things are super important. We're bringing it into our classes. But I think the biggest question now in the education scene is, what does global competence look like? And how do we bring that into our classrooms today? And I think a lot of the stuff we're seeing in the world is because of lack of global competence. So that's something that I'm kind of like scratching my head about right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great point. And so much today, people even say, right, like, what are the jobs of the future? What are they going to look like? And there's two sides of it. There's always the doom and gloom, which is, machines and everything's going to take our jobs and it's going to be a disaster. And then there's the other side of it, which is, well, let's hold on. Maybe there's new opportunities that are come as well. People who have jobs today, for example, in social media didn't have that in their minds 20 years ago necessarily. So let's see what happens. I want to save room for questions from the room for sure and to have a dialogue. But one last thing that I'm going to ask each of you in 2 minutes or less each, if you can, is to dream for a moment and imagine that you're a teacher once again, and the year, though, is 2030. So again, this will be great for you since you have a whole program thinking about this already. But what kind of role, and if you don't mind, all of you can please do this as well, because it might influence our Q&A afterward. But so what does your role look like? What does your class look like? Is it even a classroom the way we think of a classroom today, right? What's the setting in which people are learning? And kind of what's your day? So I'll give everyone a moment to think for a moment, but just kind of, what do you see? And it's your dream, so what do you want to see? Let's end on hope before we break into the dialogue, hopefully. Who wants to
I'll
start?
go quickly. So by 2030, one of my sons will be an 8th grader at my school and will be taught by me. So that'll be exciting for me and terrifying for them. I want to talk about actually what the school looks like. In New York City, we are one of the most diverse cities in the world, but have the most segregated, or one of the most segregated schooling systems in the world. And it's ironic I say that, given the fact that I have worked in an organization that serves all students of color, right? My dream, and one of the things I'm hoping to do in the next year and a half, is start KIPP's first truly integrated school. I believe that in order to gain global competence, if you have the opportunity to learn across lines of difference, that studies have already shown how far that goes in terms of building things like empathy, improving communication skills, and setting kids up for success. So I know we're a little short on time, so I'm going to stick with like the idea of a truly integrated school setting. Socio and economically diverse would be my dream for 2030.
Excellent. Which of you would like to share next?
Yeah, I think I could see myself being like a more of like a coach, a mentor, knowledge facilitator, and the setting would be lots of online learning, lots of independent, kind of like creating your own schedule and knowing that you have to, as a student, like knowing that you have to accomplish XYZ goals throughout the year, but like working with your teacher coach, teacher leader, whatever we're going to call it, to do that. And then I think the day is going back to what you were saying. I think we have to recognize that kids are kids, and it's such an incredible part of their life to be not just learning, but to in the traditional way of the way we've been thinking about it up until this point. But creating experiences for them, creating really fun days for them where they get to do, where they get to talk to people who are different to them, or they get to, go to a museum and see something incredible, and really being creative in the way we set up their day, where it's not just like sitting and listening all the time.
I love it, and I would say let's make this happen for us once we leave school as well, please, because that's happening to us in the workplace. But you as well, please.
Well, I will talk about higher education. So
Yes, please.
I believe that in the following 10, 20 years, higher education will lose the monopoly of delivering like a credential, so that you're like someone that knows computer science because you have a degree in computer science. And that people will have other options for learning and getting those skills, evidence of those skills that will be important for the employers. People that will go to the universities will have a degree that is more similar to like a liberal arts degree, because everything that is more inherent of human will be more important in the future. And I believe that will be because of two things. Maybe one of them is automatization, artificial intelligence. Skills that are more inherent to the human are the skills that are more difficult to automatize. No? But also because the pace of change will be increasingly higher. It's very high right now. So you have to reinvent yourself. So if you have those skills, also will be easier for you to learning how to learn, let's say. So if you choose the first path and you have to change your, maybe you have an app and you will see that in 6 months your job will change because you will not have job, let's say, no, for a little bit of sci-fi. And if you choose the first path, it will take you more time to change than if you choose the liberal arts 4 degrees, 4-year degree, something like that, no? I believe that technology in the schools will be present, but that will allow faculty or teachers to deliver more personalized experiential learning. So that will not substitute teachers, but will allow them to habilitate some pedagogies that are so old, maybe like Lewis, who was a proponent of experiential learning. But that is not feasible maybe right now to do it because of sometimes financial constraints. No? So I will stop there. Maybe I took much more than 2 minutes.
No, that's fine. That's great. And I completely agree with many of your points sitting in the tech company space in education. Great. So over to you all. Is there any questions? Please.
I have 2 questions.
And can you introduce yourself and where you're from as well, just so we can all keep sharing from one another in the room?
So my name is Moses. I'm a senior at UC Berkeley, studying electrical engineering and computer science, and I'm originally from Kenya. And my question, 2 questions. One of them is about to do with higher education, and another one with preschool and middle school and all that. So on higher education, what do you think online learning environments that are coming up, or schools like Minerva, which kind of mix between teaching in a classroom and teaching online, how do you think that's going to change, I don't know, this what we have right now of having professors with PhDs teaching, and do you think that's actually a viable path to go, especially when you think about education in developing countries, when we don't have like thousands of professors with PhDs that are available to teach? And is this a path that's going to give students access to quality education, or are there things that they're going to miss that their counterparts in other countries who have access to these professors are going to get? And then my second question, so for schools which are middle schools and schools with kids, let's say below 8th grade, and some students might have access to tutors, private tutors from their parents, and that'll be an opportunity for them to get ahead in life, and they'll always be ahead of others. I have some of my classmates who started learning computer science when they were 9 years old, and we're expected to know the same things exactly when you're studying freshman year, which was quite an uphill task, but somehow we still managed to make it. But I'm thinking, like, is there a way that you think technology can be used to tutor some of the students that you have worked with? Because it's one thing for someone to hypothesize and say, hey, technology can be used, but then asking someone who's actually interacting with those students from low-income neighborhoods and families how technology can actually help them to some extent, like some online tutor that they can access.
Great. So the first question then about online learning and higher education, would you like to take that?
Yes. Well, online learning means everything. I mean, it's like face-to-face learning also can be a very like a transmission point of education, or a more experiential learning. So I believe that in online learning also you can do all the from white to black and all the grays in the middle. No, so it depends what you do with online learning. I believe that online learning is a way of delivering high quality education. I think that right now you cannot do everything online, but it enhances the process because it's delivered quality education to places where maybe you will not be able to get that education with quality. Like in our countries, we have seen that we don't have universities everywhere. And I think it's also the same in the United States, because I just read that many people now, less people is changing cities to study university than it used to be 30 years ago in the United States, which is a discovery for me that changing. So online learning, I think that can deliver those quality, good online learning. No? The other thing is, I believe that we are on a stage that e-learning is as if you compare it with web searchers, not like you have Google right now, but we used to have Alta Vista. I don't know if someone here remember Alta Vista. Has enough youth accumulated to know that Alta Vista was very crappy when you, but when you were at that time, Alta Vista was like great because it was the first, way to search on the internet when it was just born. And now I think that what we have in e-learning will be remembered as the Alta Vista of e-learning, because I believe in the following 10 years, 20 years, it will be so immersive and seamless that maybe will be almost just the fact that it's online or not online, because there will be not really that difference that we have right now.
Great. And does anyone want to speak to, in the spirit of time, because I want to get the one more question in before we close, for the promise of technology to tutor, particularly in resources where technology might be harder to come by for individuals. Would either of you like to speak to that?
So I can just speak from what we're doing at Teach for Armenia. We use technology for everything, basically. We cannot possibly physically constantly go to all the classrooms all the time, so we have cameras. We do discuss this with the principal before we do this, but we have little cameras in the classrooms that we work in. And at all times, we zoom in and zoom out constantly to observe classrooms and provide real-time feedback to our teachers. And this is, again, because some of the villages don't have roads leading up to them, and you might need a car and then a donkey to, get to wherever this fellow is teaching at. We also have fellows that are connecting other villages that they're not teaching in, to do real-time, just like teaching through their iPad or laptop. And a lot of the times what happens is they apply to companies that don't need their old equipment anymore, and they get these donations into a school and facilitate learning like that. And we're able to just impact more kids through one fellow by being in all these other classrooms. The other thing I'd say is Armenia has actually translated the Khan Academy website. All the things that come out, there's just like a army of volunteers that translate Khan Academy tutorials basically for kids into Armenian, and that's been super, super helpful. And I guess I think the resources are there. Sometimes there's a language issue, but as long as there's a will to adapt it into the context that you're working in, it's possible to do. And I do think that in our context, specifically in rural Armenia, we just have to start thinking about technology in a really serious way, because the traditional school model just does not work there anymore, and it does not make any mathematical, economical sense. So.
And just to be honest, coming from the corporate side in technology, I'm going to be very clear. I come from the NGO and nonprofit sector, so I'm very honest in saying any tech company or anyone that just drops technology in a classroom, walks away and says, we've done our job, put your heightened alert stuff on, because I'll tell you, having come back from 2 recent trips to Lebanon, working in schools that are serving both Lebanese and Syrian refugee students, the thought that we would ever have been able to go in, leave some technology and walk away would have been, for me, I would have had to leave HP. But I'm glad we go there, we see what's happening, we see the generators, how long do they provide electricity? What are they able to do? What happens if it breaks? If you don't have that, all the promise of technology is pretty much gone. And I think that's what you're saying, right, is making sure it's meaningful to the students as well as the teachers and principals. So.
And that is being leveraged by the right people who aren't locking it up somewhere.
Exactly. We have time for one more question really quickly. You have the microphone already, so please.
Yeah, I guess you can hear me. Vyacheslav Kretsu, Republic of Moldova, former post-Soviet Union country, same problems. As long as you're talking, sharing some of your experience, I just dropped some questions to my network, and a couple questions came from a Moldovan community. There is this factor that comes to every education institution initiative that how do you measure learning, or how does learning happening? Another question is, what are the factors that contribute to the learning outcomes? And a couple of that I dropped in here, it's do you think that more devices will improve the learning outcomes in schools? And do you think that the internet improves learning outcomes, or it just makes the learning opportunity equal to every student? So this is what comes from back Moldova.
Okay, we're going to do what I call the hot seat of questions, which is we have to respond to all of them in one go. Was there any other question that I can add to the roster before we close? Yes, please.
My name is Alex Jayune. My name is Alex Jayune. I'm studying agriculture engineering in Costa Rica. It works now. Thank you. Yeah, but my passion is in education, and graduating in December, I'm going back to Uganda to start a school. I've visited many schools in Texas, Honduras, Costa Rica, and in Rwanda. I want to change the education system in Ghana because I'm seeing like a few schools are doing like what we have been discussing. But my challenge is like, if it works in my school, how can I advocate it for other schools in Uganda? Because Larissa has been talking of the challenge with the government setup, or like what is the vision of the students according to the Ministry of Education? Like how is the approach to that? And also, I wanted to ask, okay, it has been answered previously, so.
Okay, excellent. So
I just want the.
perfect. So I guess our roundtable for questions, just to summarize, how are we measuring learning? And do more devices actually increase learning? What's the take on that? And then to bring in this question of scale and, what are the challenges, particularly with, maybe different political contexts? Who would like to start to address some of them?
I will answer a couple of these super quickly. We are not measuring learning well. So that's my answer to the first one. And the question about devices, for me, the thing that has shown to increase learning the most is a tight feedback loop. So when a child makes a mistake, the worst thing you could possibly do is not give them feedback. Then they go home and do their homework and start encoding mistakes into their memory, right? So whatever, and devices certainly play a role in how do you tighten the feedback loop between when a kid provides a response. This is part of the reason why Khan Academy, though it has some flaws, is so brilliant because you get immediate feedback. And that's what our kids are used to in gaming, in social media. You type someone something, you're going to get feedback right back. So for me, anything that increases, that tightens and shortens the feedback loop is going to increase learning.
Excellent. To the issues of scale, does anyone want to speak to that quickly? I know we're definitely over time now.
Just a very quick advice. I would say go into one school, make it really great, defy the odds, and then go to your government and say, this is what I can do. Can you give me 10 more schools? And then just go from there. And then also try to look for networks, organizations that are learning organizations that are working in that space. I really recommend you connect with the Teach for Uganda team. Kasaga is a friend, and I can give you my business card and introduce you to him. And then also there's another organization that actually looks at how to reimagine schools through various school management models. It's called One World Network of Schools. And again, I'm happy to connect you with them, but I would say just go for that one, make it one great school, and then use that as an argument to scale up.
Great. We're out of time, I'm so sorry, but thank you for the discussion, panelists, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you.